For years, long stretches of American highway carried more than travelers. Behind the wheel, a man drifted from state to state, his life blending into the endless flow of truck stops, back roads, and distant horizons. To most, he was just another face passing through. But somewhere beyond the glow of the roadside lights, a darker journey was unfolding, one hidden beneath thousands of miles of open road. Listen to the full story over on my true crime channel, Saturn Soul, link down below. Hey man, Joey from Canada here. Really love the channel, and I think I have a story that you might be interested in reading. So to say I had a weird upbringing would be something of an understatement. You see, I was born in the late 80s to parents that could be described as latent hippies. And then not long after my 8th birthday, they went full hippie, never go full hippie, and moved us out to this old farming commune way out in the woods over in British Columbia. Now, there used to be these huge corporate types here in Toronto, but my dad got into all this back to the land stuff after reading a bunch of philosophy books. It must have resonated with Mom too, because she started going along with it maybe a year before we moved. And while I wasn't into the idea of packing up and leaving behind all my friends in the 3rd grade, it only took 2 little words to bring me around to the idea. No school. The place was called the Evergreen Collective, and while it billed itself as a kind of woodland paradise, it was little more than a bunch of old houses and cabins spread out on a big piece of cleared land surrounded by thick forest. Now, I'm getting a lot of this info from my father because obviously I was too young to remember any intimate details, but there were maybe 20 or 30 adults and a handful of kids, including me and my little sister, and at first, it felt like the adventure of a lifetime. We didn't have television or much electricity in some of the buildings, but who the heck needs TV when you can just run around the woods all day with other kids, having fun, exploring, and making new friends? Now, we didn't have to get up early anymore. We didn't have to sit in stinky old classrooms with lame teachers and then eat gross cafeteria food at lunch. All of that was behind us, and it felt great. Us kids ran wild during the day, building forts out of fallen branches and exploring the edges of the woods, while the grown-ups shared farming chores like planting, feeding the chickens, or tending to the goats to get their milk. It wasn't vegetarian or vegan or anything like that, and thank God too, because I'd have never survived. In fact, the food was probably one of the best things about it. Everyone ate together at night, with all the grown-ups talking about peace and harmony and how messed up modern society was. Now, I obviously didn't understand much of what they were talking about, but whenever anyone asked me where I preferred to live, the answer was easy. There. And living in the city felt stale and kind of scary. But living out in the woods was the total opposite. Sure, it was kind of scary at night, but Mom and Dad would always tell us that if we followed the rules and didn't wander out at night, we'd be fine. For a while, that was true. And I guess for a period, we were all living the hippie dream. But then things started to change, and when they did, they changed dramatically. I didn't understand why at the time. I just noticed that the adults had started to argue more. There were meetings in the big barn that went late, and sometimes I heard raised voices coming from it, like people were angry. And when I asked my dad about it, he just said some folks were just having a little disagreement and that everything would be smoothed over in no time. But he was just trying to protect me. The tension kept on growing and the atmosphere kept on getting worse. People who used to be real friendly didn't seem to talk much anymore. And then one night I overheard my dad saying something about a split to my mom when I was supposed to be asleep. I kept on listening because the only kind of split that I knew came with whipped cream and chocolate sauce. But as I did, I figured out the disagreement had not only not been smoothed over, but had gotten worse. He talked about land and money and ideals, but like I said, that wasn't anything I really understood. But what I did understand was how people didn't seem to be eating as much together anymore, and that some families had moved to the far side of the property close to the old logging road. Folks moved out, folks moved in, and for a while the mood kind of lifted slightly as the weeks went by. But then, the strangers started coming out of the woods. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was helping my mom pick beans late one afternoon. The sun was dipping behind the mountains, everything was peaceful, and then I looked over toward the tree line, maybe 100 yards away or so, and saw shapes moving between the trunks. I thought that they were animals at first, maybe a couple of scouts from a herd of deer, but then I realized that they were people, sort of hunched down, and that some of the people had antlers or branches sticking out of their heads. I froze and pointed, but by the time Mom looked, they were gone. She told me it was probably just deer or maybe my imagination, but I knew what I saw, and that night I could not sleep. I lay there listening to the wind rustling the trees and imagined things with glowing eyes circling our cabin. Mom told me not to worry so much, that it was all just part of adjusting and that sometimes our eyes played tricks on us. Now, I felt reassured in the way that only a mom can assure a young boy, but a few nights later it got worse. My little sister and I woke up to shouting outside, and so did my parents. It sounded like someone was screaming for help, so my dad grabbed the big flashlight and ran out to join a couple of other men as they headed in the direction of the screams. I snuck to the window and pressed my face against the glass, and then suddenly saw him. The father of a girl named Sarah came running from the trees towards the cabins we were staying at. I thought he was alone at first, but then I saw he wasn't. There were figures behind him, running through the dark, and as the flashlight beams hit them, I saw what they were dressed like. They looked like monsters. So to 8-year-old me, they basically were, but the truth was, they were just people. People who wore masks that looked like they were made from bark, leaves, and animal skulls. I remember how one had a big twisted smile painted on what might have been a sack, and then suddenly Sarah's dad tripped and fell, and they were on him in a second, landing whatever blows they could before my dad helped chase them off. When my dad and them got there, they found Sarah's dad beaten up and bloody on the ground. Now, he said it was those bastards, but when I asked, Dad didn't tell me the whole truth about who they were, just that they were bad men in the woods now and it wasn't safe to play there anymore. Since we didn't know what was going on and couldn't for the life of us figure it out, us kids made up stories to try and explain what was going on. A kid named Jackson was maybe 11 at the time, so to us he knew everything, and we believed him when he said it was the forest spirits who didn't like us cutting trees for firewood. Another kid said that they were trolls who were mad at us for living in their home, but to me, they sounded like the monsters from the old fairy tale books my grandmother used to read to us, creatures that lived under hills and came out when people broke promises. I know everyone made a promise, everyone in the commune, I mean, that they'd all stay together, and the fact that that didn't happen felt like a really big broken promise to me. In the daytime we were scared, but me and the other kids had each other, so we got through. But the nights were something else completely. Every single sound had me thinking, what was that? And when my parents said it was just deer or birds out there, I heard 1 or 2 whistles that were way too low to belong to a bird. Besides, birds don't sing at night. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, more than once too, to the sound of someone scratching on the other side of the wall near my bed. I have no clue what they were actually doing. Maybe scraping a knife against the outside of the cabin or something. But to me, it sounded like claws or long fingernails raking against the logs outside, and each and every time it had me running to my mother and dad in tears. And we were told things would go back to normal eventually, and these strangers in the woods would go away. My father said he and Mom called them that because it seemed less scary than saying, the folks that were our neighbors a few months back are now trying to physically drive us off the land. And I get it too, because how the heck is a kid supposed to even compute that? Whereas all that stranger danger stuff already had us scared of people we didn't know, so I guess it just made sense. Now anyway, we were told it'd be over soon, but it wasn't. The attacks kept happening, but only ever at night. The strangers would catch someone walking between houses or going to the outhouse. Then they'd swarm out of the dark, knock them down, and then beat the hell out of them. they did other stuff too, almost symbolic stuff. Sometimes they tore their victims' clothes or smeared mud on their face to imply they were unclean. Now, they never killed anyone, but they hurt people bad enough that before long, a couple of families packed up and left entirely, just threw in the towel saying, "Nope, that's enough for me." Others weren't so quick to turn tail, and I remember the morning after one attack, seeing one lady walking around with a black eye and a split lip. But she didn't seem scared. She just seemed mad. And then one night, they broke into the chicken coop on the far side and killed half the birds, leaving bloody feathers arranged in patterns on the ground. Another time, they painted symbols on the side of the cabin, circles and jagged lines that looked even creepier when the flashlights hit them after dark. Our parents tried to protect us, not just from the attacks, but from the knowledge of them too. But as you can probably tell, they only worked for so long. The worst night was in the spring. I woke up to my sister shaking me. Then when I asked what was wrong, she pointed out of the window towards an orange flashlight flickering through the trees. We crept along the window and saw a group of them, maybe 8 or 9 in total, standing near the cabins on the other side of the track. Their masks looked monstrous. One had antlers, another had a long beak like a bird. Others had horns but a blank face, and I'm guessing they could see through this sort of thin mesh. And they started chanting something in low and rhythmic style, and then suddenly started throwing rocks at the windows of the cabins. I heard glass smash, and then a woman screamed, and the strangers were chased off before they could do any damage. As promised, the attacks did eventually stop. Not all at once, but they got less and less frequent and then suddenly just stopped altogether. I guess enough of the families on our side had packed up and left, and the ones who wanted us gone knew it was only a matter of time before the others left too. They were right too, because by the time we were just one of 5 families living together and things were so difficult we could barely get by, my parents decided it was time to give up the ghost. And years later, when I was a teenager and we moved back to the city, I asked my dad what really happened. He looked tired, and after going over all the stuff I just described, he basically said it was just people being people. After the split, the other group got sick of sharing resources and decided that they wanted the whole property, and so a few of the more radical ones started dressing up and attacking people and trying to make life miserable enough that people would just sort of leave and give it up. And that was it. There was no forest spirits, no fairy tale monsters with antlers and giant claws, just a bunch of adults in costumes acting like a-holes because they, in so many words, couldn't just agree to disagree. I don't know if the commune still exists. I never went back to check, and neither have my parents or little sister. But for a few years of my childhood, the Canadian forest really did have monsters in it. They just took their monster selves off when the sun came up and pretended to be people again. On May 13th of 1987, I was a girl of just 13, walking the final few blocks home after catching the bus from middle school. I lived out in the suburbs in a small Midwestern city, and while we had a pretty neat downtown area with tons of cool stores and stuff to do, we were pretty much surrounded by fields and forests for miles in every direction. The area had a real rural feel to it, not just in appearance either, but in culture. It was one of those leave your door unlocked at night kind of places, where everyone knew each other and everyone trusted each other. I wasn't brought up to question my elders or be anything but polite to people, but that made me nothing but a target for a kind of person I never even knew existed. As I was walking along, I saw a strange man parked at the side of the road. Now I say strange because he was a stranger, not because he looked strange. In fact, he didn't really look anything but normal. He was well dressed, had a nice car, and he seemed friendly enough. And so when he turned to me as I was passing and asked if I'd be kind enough to help him, I said, sure. He told me he had a whole bunch of Nancy Drew and Babysitter Club books, which most of you probably have never even heard of, but trust me when I say that at the time, these were huge. And the man totally had my number, too. Look up the dictionary definition of the word bookish, and you might find a little picture of 13-year-old me staring back at you. So when this guy asked if I wanted to take a book or two off his hands that would otherwise end up at Goodwill, it felt like Christmas had come early. I walked over towards his open trunk as he took a step back to give me a little room. It was little stuff like that. How warm his smile was, how he even seemed to respect my personal space, that assured me that he was just a kind man who wanted to do something nice for someone. But the reality was that he didn't intend to give me anything. He just wanted to take, and take, and take. I remember hoping to see a whole trunk filled with books that I hadn't read yet, but when I looked into the trunk, I could only see about a half dozen scattered near the back. And when I looked back at him to confirm that they were the books he was referring to, he nodded and said, "Take a look," all warmly. But then when I reached for one of the Nancy Drew written on the spine, I felt my feet suddenly leave the floor. I felt the man's hands on me too, grabbing and lifting, and I remember kind of shifting and rolling as I landed in the trunk just in time to see him slam it closed. I only caught a brief glimpse of his face as I did, but when I did, it was like he'd completely transformed. The kind, approachable man was gone, and in his place was something more animal than man. I screamed for help, kicking and thrashing out at my surroundings to make as much noise as I could, but I guess the guy timed it just right and no one saw what he did, because no one came running to help me. Instead, I heard the sound of the guy's car engine starting up. Then as the car started to move, I felt my hope start to ebb away. And not just like metaphorically, it was a physical sensation. It forced tears from my eyes and I started sobbing, calling out for my mother or father or anyone to come rescue me. I was so desperate to try to force the trunk open while the guy was driving, but as you can imagine, that didn't do any good. I kept going back and forth between giving up and accepting that I'd been kidnapped, then refusing to give up and fighting as hard as I could to get out of that trunk. And I only stopped when the car came to a stop and the engine was silent. I remember being so scared that I froze up, staying perfectly still as I heard the sound of a car door slamming and then the faint sound of footsteps on dirt outside. Now, seconds later, the trunk opened and all I could think to do was try and run. I practically threw myself out of the truck, past the man and onto the dirt before scrambling to my feet. I recognized that I was on some kind of rural property, but I still got this flash of hope, thinking if I could just make it to a road, I'd be able to get myself some help. But by the time my feet were pumping, they were only pumping air. The man had grabbed me, picked me up, and started walking me away from his house. As I kicked and screamed, I remember being sure that he was going to kill me. If he was going to take me into his house and down into some basement, then I could probably count on being kept prisoner. But maybe he was walking me towards some field out back to a grave he'd already dug. And those thoughts gave me such an adrenaline boost that I was able to whip around and bite the guy right on his shoulder. I remember sinking my teeth in as hard as I could, so hard that I must have drawn blood. But the guy didn't even so much as cry out. He just dropped me, but as soon as I hit the grass, I felt an impact on the right side of my face from where he kicked me so hard I could literally see stars. I felt dizzy. So dizzy I couldn't get up and still had those little pinpricks of light floating around the edges of my vision when he grabbed me up again to carry me. But that time, I just couldn't seem to summon the strength to fight him anymore. He walked me away into the middle of the field out back of his house and then dropped me again. And I landed so hard and awkwardly that it knocked the wind out of me, and I'd only made it to my knees by the time the man grabbed something among the grass and pulled. Then when he did, he opened some type of trap door which revealed a reinforced pit that he'd dug. It looked like he put a lot of work into it, or at least enough that it wouldn't all collapse and bury someone alive, but obviously that did little to reassure me at the time. I begged him not to put me down there, and told him I'd do anything if he didn't, but he told me to shut up before he shoved me down in the hole, and then he slammed the trapdoor closed before I even had time to react. The pit wasn't deep enough for me to be able to stand up straight, so I could only kneel or squat. I tried shoving the trapdoor open, but there was some kind of mechanism in place that ensured that I couldn't. All I could do was struggle, until I was too exhausted and emotionally drained to do anything but lie down and close my eyes. For those of you wondering how I slept in a dark hole in the middle of a field after being abducted by some psycho, well, the answer is not good. I tried sleeping on a plane years after, and it felt very familiar in that sense, that as soon as you start drifting off, your mind is like, no, 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 you gotta stay awake. That was the first time I experienced these weird, involuntary jerks whenever I was right on the cusp of falling asleep, and there's something that I still experience almost 40 years later. When the man next opened the trap door, I saw that the night sky was now behind him. I was hungry, tired, and extremely dehydrated, far too weak to fight anymore, and so when he spoke, I just looked up and listened as he told me, "Out of the hole." I was too weak to climb out of what I'm guessing was a 7 or 8 foot hole, so the guy had to reach in and pull me out. I told him I was hungry and thirsty as he tied my elbows behind my back with something, but all he did was tell me to shut up before he marched me towards his house. I tried looking around as he walked me with one hand around my arm. I wanted to see if I could recognize any landmarks or anything like that to give me an idea of where I was. But he growled at me to look at the ground and nowhere else, and then every time after, he put a blindfold on me so I couldn't see at all. After he walked me into his house, he made me sit at the kitchen table with my hands on it at all times, and any time I moved them, even when it was to rub my eyes or scratch something, he yelled at me to keep my hands where he could see them. Or at least the first time he yelled at me. The second time, he started hitting me. I was crying when he was done, but I kept my hands flat on the table as he put a plate of something in front of me, something that smelled disgusting. I know it was some kind of raw meat, and from the smell, other people have told me that it might have been some kind of organ meat, maybe kidney or liver or something. He told me to eat it, but I refused. He even tried forcing some into my mouth, but it only made me gag and bite at his fingers, which caused him to smack me around the head again. He dragged me out of the house and back towards the hole, saying that I wouldn't be getting anything else to eat, so I better get used to what I was given. I tried to scream, to make any kind of noise to let anyone in earshot know something was wrong, but all that would come out were these weak cries and sobs, and then the next thing, the wind was knocked out of me after I was dropped into that hole. And then everything went dark again. I must have been kept in that hole without any food or water for more than 12 hours because the next time the trap door opened, it looked like the sun had only just set and I felt like I was going to die. Now, I'd never gone that long without food or water before, so I wasn't on death's door by any means, but it sure as heck felt like it. I was too weak to even stand, let alone speak, and the guy had to carry me all the way across the field and towards his house. I remember laying on a dirty, stinky couch as he tried feeding me more of that raw, foul-smelling meat. But then that time, I was so hungry that I ate it. Now, I think he must have chopped it up and maybe added some syrup or something to make it taste not as bad, but I still didn't chew. I just swallowed the little pieces while taking sips of water through a straw. And then by the time I felt like I had some strength back, the only words that I could manage to get out were, "I want my mom and dad." I remember the guy pulling up a chair and sighing like he had something difficult to tell me. Then he explained, in no uncertain terms, that I'd never see my mom or dad again because he'd killed them. I didn't believe him at first, but I guess he'd been watching our family for some time because he seemed to know an awful lot about us. The fact that he knew what our house looked like and that he even knew my parents' names, it had me completely convinced that he was telling the truth. I even foolishly asked, "What about Angie?" who was my 7-year-old sister at the time. Now, I say foolishly because I don't think the guy actually knew Angie's name until I said it. He told me she was dead too, that he'd taken his time to make sure that she didn't feel any pain, and he said it all in a way that made him sound almost like the good guy. He said it like they'd each been suffering some terminal illness and that what he'd done was a mercy, but the underlying message was a clear one. No one was looking for me. My family was gone, and I'd never get to see them ever again. I guess that's why people like that target children. A grown woman, maybe even a kid a couple of years older, would have demanded to see proof, and upon not getting it, they might have chosen not to believe him. But I guess he just had the right amount of information to convince me, and it worked. All I did was cry as I felt myself getting more and more energy from what I'd eaten, and then at one point I guess I just freaked. I attacked him, screaming as I did, biting and scratching and trying anything I could to hurt the man I believed had killed my family. As you can imagine, this didn't go very well at all for me, because I remember two things. Me hitting him, then me waking up in the hole again with my eyes so swollen that if there was light for me to see, I was pretty sure that I wouldn't be able to see anything out of it. After that, the man started spiking my food with something, and I know that because every time I ate or drank anything he gave me, I'd feel very tired and almost spaced out. I knew eating and drinking was dooming me, if I can even use that word that way, but I also knew that not eating or drinking would be the death of me. But then once the drugging started, so did the assaults. I don't really want to talk or write about what happened whenever he took me upstairs to his bedroom. It's the one part that I still can't think about without shutting down and crying all the water out of my body, and so I keep a kind of emotional wall between myself and those parts of my story. I guess that while it was happening, I did such a good job at switching off and disassociating that whenever I think about it now, it's like I'm there all over again, confronting what happened to me for the very first time. But I will say this. One of the things he told me regarding why he was doing what he was doing was that we needed to start repopulating the Earth. He told me everyone else was dead, that the Russians had dropped A-bombs on American cities, and we were in one of the few places left that wasn't fatally poisoned by the stuff the bombs left behind. I remember not believing him on that one. We've been told about all that stuff in school doing duck and cover lessons in previous years, and how the bombs would affect everything. We were even told how they'd turn the rain into poison and how the rain would kill all the grass and the trees. But it rained a whole bunch of times while I was abducted and nothing died at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. Now the grass got greener and taller and lusher, and the only kind of sickness or nausea I felt was when I went too long without food, or whatever he gave me to eat made me feel nauseous. And the world might not have ended, but mine sure did for a while. And time started to become meaningless to me. Every time he opened up the trap door, it'd be nighttime, and then after putting me back in the pit before the sun came up, I'd stay in there all day until it was dark again, or sunset at the very minimum. This is what started me off thinking that whatever this guy did, he probably had people coming by his house in the daytime. That meant if I managed to slip a note somewhere saying that I needed help, someone might just find it and end up rescuing me. Now that was just about the only thing that I came up with in all the time that I was there that seemed like it might give me a shot at getting myself rescued. Because I'd also been told that if I ever tried to run, he wouldn't drag me back to the pit. He'd just shoot me and then leave me in the woods for the hogs to eat. And by God, if a pack of feral hogs got to me before a person did, there wouldn't be anything left of me to find. Like I said, time started to become meaningless because I wasn't sleeping. Sometimes I wasn't sure if a whole day had passed or if he dragged me into the house twice in the night after I'd either passed out from the drugs or he knocked me unconscious. That meant that I wasn't sure if a week or a month had gone by the time the trapdoor opened during the daytime. And it marked such an unusual and uncharacteristic turn that at first I was terrified that he finally decided to kill me. I knew he was never going to let me go. He couldn't. And I also figured that he wouldn't have the patience to keep me for any considerable amount of time. And so, like I said, when I first saw that trapdoor open and daylight creep through, I thought that was it. But when I looked up, squinting and shielding my eyes after going so long without seeing any direct sunlight, I saw it wasn't the man who abducted me. It was a little boy. At first I thought he was about to be thrown down with me, and it might sound horrible, but I was almost kinda glad for a moment. I've been so incredibly lonely, so much I didn't even know a person could feel that lonely, so lonely that I wanted to die. So while it might sound sick, I was weirdly happy to see another kid with me. But then I realized that he was all alone, looking down at me with these big scared eyes, and then before I had a chance to croak out, "Help me," he dropped the trap door so it slammed shut again, and then I heard footsteps getting quieter and quieter until I couldn't hear them at all anymore. It might sound strange, but of all that I went through during that time, having that kid drop the trap door down and run off made me cry longer and harder than I ever had before. I guess I wasn't thinking right. I couldn't think properly, because instead of thinking, "I've been found, I'm saved, everything's going to be fine," all I could think was that I'd been so close to being rescued, but that damn kid had run off like a no-good coward. I even started to think the kid was related to the guy who took me, that he'd let him go out there to the field and just stare at me before he ran back to the house. But like I said, I wasn't thinking properly. The kid lived just a few miles away on a farm with his parents, and as it turned out, he and his friends had been trespassing in the woods on my abductor's land when they saw him open the trap door one evening just before the sun set. There was obviously word going around that I was missing too, because folks were looking all over the place for me and telling people to keep an eye out for any girl fitting my description who might seem distressed or sad or frightened for any reason. Well, after seeing the guy retrieve me from the pit with a friend of his, they brought 2 or 3 more kids to the field to prove that they weren't lying about me being there. They didn't keep their mouths shut, like I was frightened they would. They told everyone they passed on the ride back to the kids' farm, and then the next time that trapdoor opened, I didn't look up to see the guy who'd taken me. I looked up to see the county sheriff, and while I felt a happiness I can barely describe at the sight of him, he had a similar look to the one the boy had. Only instead of just horror, there was anger in there too. Anger along with the sadness he felt that a little girl like me had to go through hell at such a young age. The man who took me was arrested, but before he could go to trial, a whole bunch of other doctors decided that he was simply too crazy to be held responsible for his actions. I heard he told them about how God had a plan for us, how we were supposed to be together, and that all he'd done was take what was rightfully his. I don't want to use his name, not because I can't bring myself to type it out without breaking down, but because I don't think he needs any more notoriety than he already has. I know he told a psychiatrist that he's proud of what he did, and the more people who know about him, the more people will try to follow his example, and that's not something I want. And as morbid as it sounds, there's a bottle of champagne I've kept in my fridge for quite a number of years now, and the day that cork gets popped is the day that rotten, no-account son of a bitch is lying on a cooling board, dead as dead can be. Many, many years ago now, I used to work as a cleaner in North London, and although a lot of people assumed otherwise, I actually really enjoyed my job. I was doing a PhD at the time, and I've been struggling with the work and study balance for literally years when an opportunity suddenly fell into my lap. The landlady was over-collecting the rent, and she was lovely, so we'd always share a cup of tea and have a chat whenever she popped over. And then when she mentioned being hard up for a cleaner because her current one had just gone on maternity leave, I just blurted out, "I'll do it." Now, I was only half joking because I hated the waitress job that I had at the time, but when I found out what she was paying, it went from a semi-serious offer to a very serious one. Then cut to about 3 months later, and I was doing my landlady's house and her neighbor's place twice a week each. The pay was great, the hours really suited me, and both houses were really nice places near Regent's Park. And then couple all that with how much I enjoyed cleaning, I know, I'm weird, and it was a lovely way to earn a few quid in the mornings while freeing up my afternoons and evenings to study. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was truly content in life. That is, until the universe decided to put me in the wrong place at the wrong time and change everything for me. I just finished washing the kids' clothes at the neighbor's place when I suddenly heard the doorbell. You get the odd cold caller sometimes, but on the off chance it was important, I still felt that I had to answer the door and see who it was. And so with a big sigh, I made my way downstairs, walked along the hallway, then opened up the front door. In front of me was a man wearing gloves, a woolly hat, and a black snood covering his neck and chin. But since it was the middle of a brutally cold winter that didn't seem in the least bit out of the ordinary, he was also carrying a clipboard and pen which, to naive mid-20s me, made him look very official. And then with a smile and a cheerful voice he said, "Morning, love. Just come to read the meter." I don't actually know how it works in America, but here we have meters in our houses someone comes to read, and that's how our gas and electricity bills are calculated, at least in the age before smart meters anyway. And the only thing was, my landlady's neighbor hadn't mentioned anything about someone popping over, and if someone was due to pop around for any reason, she always left a note on the kitchen table to let me know. She did it for deliveries that were due, workmen coming to measure something for remodeling, even friends dropping things off so I didn't get worried about strangers appearing at the door. Utilities companies almost always send a letter saying a reading is due, something I knew from experience, so the fact that the neighbor hadn't mentioned anything had me feeling less than comfortable with letting a total stranger into their house. I told the man that I was just the cleaner, but that the homeowner hadn't mentioned anything about a meter reading due that morning. The man replied that it had probably just slipped her mind, and since it'd take less than a minute to get the reading, there was no harm in me letting him in so he could get it done. Now, I thought that was a fair point, just not enough for me to feel totally comfortable letting him inside, so I asked if I could see some identification of some kind. The guy stayed really friendly as he told me he did have his ID card, he just left it in his van, and he also seemed to think that'd be an acceptable answer for some reason when in reality, that only bolstered my suspicions. Now, there was this sort of awkward standoff for a few seconds, as he expected me to just step aside and say, "Oh, go on then, it'll only be a minute." But instead, I stood there in silence expecting him to be the one to move, to go and get his bloody ID card out of his van. He broke the silence by saying, "Do you really want me to go get it? I'm parked all the way around the corner." To which I told him yes, I would like him to go and get it. And that's the moment his face dropped. He realized that happy, smiley, cockney facade was doing nothing for him, and so he dropped it as I started to close the door. I should have slammed it, loud and quick, I know that now, but still maintaining that ridiculous air of British politeness, I tried closing it slowly and softly, which, as you can probably guess, was a big, big mistake. I'd almost gotten it closed when a powerful impact forced it back. It was a really big, thick oak door, too, so after sending what I imagined was his foot into it, it came back at me so hard that I had to sort of jump back out of the way so it didn't trap me behind it as it flung open. It wasn't just one man in front of me anymore. It was now two, and I'm guessing the other one had been waiting out of sight, but he was dressed essentially the same as the first. The hat and gloves weren't for the cold. They were to keep them from leaving forensic evidence behind. And now those snoods weren't just keeping their necks and chins warm, they were covering their faces up to the bridge of their noses. The second man closed the door behind him, carefully too, then once it was shut, they started screaming at me to get on the floor. I was so frightened that I didn't do as they told me at first, like I thought that they were going to do something to me. And so when they told me that they were going to rob the place and started asking where all the valuables were, it was like a switch flipped in my head. And I got down on my knees thinking, the sooner I just go with it, the sooner they'll leave. I'm still so ashamed of myself, but when the man who'd been holding the clipboard held his pen to my eye, he asked me where the valuables were, and I completely folded. The implication was obviously that if I didn't tell them, the guy was going to gouge my eye out and just blind me by thrusting the sharp metal tip into the socket. It was frighteningly clever of them, really. To think the pen he was holding doubled as the weapon he used to threaten people. It worked too, and I told them that there was jewelry in the bedroom and iPads in the kids' rooms. My employers, both my landlady and my neighbor, both said that it was the right thing to do, and my safety was infinitely more important than anything material. But even today, it feels like a little betrayal that I'll never be able to take back. They took me with them when they went upstairs, confiscating my phone and making me sit in the bath when they realized that that was the only room that they didn't have a landline installed. They told me to stay put while they ransacked the master bedroom, stuffing everything they found into one of the kids' backpacks. It must have amounted to tens of thousands of pounds in jewelry and other trinkets because, like I said, I was working for some very wealthy people, even for London. But then once they were done taking everything of value that wasn't nailed down and could fit into a piece of carry-on, they started asking me where the safe was. Not like they were guessing there was a safe, but it was almost like they knew. There was a safe, of course, behind a painting in the office on the second floor. It was one of those spinning lock kinds, and I'm not sure what they're called actually, but while I knew it was there for having cleaned the place so often, I didn't know the combination, and really, why would I? But the men seemed to think that I knew, and no matter how much I protested, they wouldn't relent. Maybe they robbed a place where the housekeeper knew the safe code, or maybe they were just so blinded by greed that they didn't stop to reason. But no matter what I said, they refused to accept that I didn't know, and the more I protested, the angrier they got. After maybe a minute or two of me trying and failing to convince them otherwise, one of the men seemed to lose his temper. But instead of hitting me or whatever he would do, he stormed out of the room after saying that he had an idea. He came back less than a minute later after going up and down the stairs to the third floor and back again, and in his hand he held a cordless power drill. It had been sitting in the dad's office. I don't know what he'd been doing with it exactly, but now it was in the hands of that man. Then, not needing any clues whatsoever as to what he was planning on doing with it, my begging and pleading went into overdrive. I swore on my mom's life that I didn't know the combination and I was just the cleaner, and now I think that's the part that they just didn't believe. No matter how many times I said it, and honestly, I think it was into the triple figures by the time they left, it was like they just didn't hear me. The man activated the drill a few times, or fired it or whatever so it made noise, and then he put the tip of the drill right against my temple. He told me that he'd drill into my brain if I didn't tell him the safe combination. I wouldn't have been able to tell him if I did know, and I couldn't even speak by then as I was so scared. All I could do was sob and shake my head with my eyes closed, and I couldn't even bring myself to look. I didn't realize this at the time, but they were never going to kill me. That'd bring them too much trouble. But they did torture me, just not in the Spanish Inquisition or Guantanamo Bay ways that we all picture when we hear the word. They just hit me again and again after taking the drill away from my head. And these days, I think that it might have just been out of frustration that I didn't know the code to a safe that, to be fair, was probably packed with all kinds of valuables. Because if they found all that jewelry just sitting out in the open, then what was in the safe? I later found out it was just stuff like passports and birth certificates, things the parents didn't want their two sons finding and drawing all over. The most valuable thing in there was an old brooch belonging to someone's mom, so even if I had given them the code, they'd have probably finished up hitting me all the same. I kept begging them to stop, saying that I was just the cleaner and I didn't know the code, until one of them suddenly said, "All right, enough." And then after that, it was like I didn't exist anymore. They did one last look around for anything that they could carry to their van, and then grabbed the bag with the jewelry in it and walked out of the house, all calm, so as not to alert the neighbors. I kept telling myself to get out of the bath and call the police, but all I did was cry for a few minutes before I finally told myself, all right, enough, and I found a phone to dial 999 with. Going through the actual burglary was easily the worst thing that's ever happened to me, but sometimes it's the aftermath that felt like it was worse. I know it's just the way my personality type deals with trauma, but I just wanted to forget about it and move on. And yet my injuries, the sleepless nights, and even the way that I felt going back to the house where it had happened, that made it all so much more difficult to deal with. I had to talk to the police a few times. I had to go back to the hospital to get a brain scan, and people kept asking me, "Are you okay?" even though they knew that I wasn't. Now I know in that case, well, all cases actually, it was just people trying to help me, but I felt like I was being forced to relive what I'd been through over and over again every time anyone asked about it. I just wanted to be distracted. I wanted to move on. And that's why my employer found it so weird when I insisted on coming back to work as soon as I could. A, because I needed the money, and B, because the more I did my job, the easier it'd be to just sort of not feel terrified all the time. The police didn't find who did it for a while, but about a year later, 2 men were arrested after committing an almost identical violent daytime burglary on a property just 10 minutes' drive from the one that I was attacked at. I heard it from the news before I heard it from the police, but the day that officer confirmed it for me was one of the happiest days of my entire life. Neither admitted to it and neither was charged with the crime, but they were convicted over that other burglary they did, and to me, I'll take any small justice available. Because the first night I spent knowing that they were in custody was the soundest I've slept in a long, long time. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday night. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. I also have a true crime channel called Saturn Soul. All links are down in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.